Hey there, my name is Parl Bandari, and I'm the host of Exponential Customer Success Every Day. I am here to talk to folks that are impacted by or impacting the markets that we're in today to learn, to grow, and to also share that knowledge with others. So whether you're a founder, a customer success professional, or just someone that's interested in what's going on in the market today, I hope you'll tune in. Welcome to another episode of Exponential Customer Success. I'm really excited to have with me today Sarah Romanko, who I met kind of in a really interesting way, like through LinkedIn networking world, right? We sort of, our paths collided. And it's been really interesting to see your path and your journey. So would love for our audience if you could tell us a little bit about your story. Who are you? And I like to add in, what do you like to do outside of work? Like, what are some fun things about you?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's so great to be here. Thank you for having me. So, a little bit about me and my story. I grew up very different from my peers. And by very different, I mean, I loved to study. I got excited about studying, and I wasn't the typical kid growing up. So, throughout high school, I took more than 10 business classes as electives. I went to networking events. I did business competitions. When I went to university, I actually had the opportunity to continue doing that. So I took a lot more business classes, went to more networking events, but then I also had the opportunity to get started in venture capital from a really young age. And that was very unique to me because I saw how hard venture capital was as an industry to break into. And so I just told myself, I'm going to work my way into it, not having the traditional background. And then to answer your other question, what I like to do outside of work, because yes, I do work a lot and I love what I do. Fun fact about me is that I love to go to arcades. So I am an arcade master. I can pretty much win at any crane game, or I can tell you, let me backtrack a little bit. So I can win. I either can win at the crane game or tell you why you won't win, because I've done research on the brands and I've read the manuals, and I've actually been doing this since I was probably 3 or 4 years old. And so it's kind of a fun fact of like, if there's ever a networking event being hosted like at an arcade, or there's a crane game somewhere, like I actually know if you can win or not. So super fun. Get very excited about that, but I'll pause there.
That is so cool. I have not heard of anybody saying they're like an arcade master. I mean, that is very neat. And you've got me thinking it's probably like a great like sort of party like way to like meet people and
Yes.
network, because sometimes you don't know people, and it's whenever you come together around a game or something, it brings immediate comfort. So
Oh yeah,
that's
definitely.
awesome. That's awesome. Very, very unique. Um, so tell us a little bit about your sort of job today. You are working in venture capital. What is your job? Who is your company focused on? Just a little bit of education for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So my official job title, so I'm a full-time associate at Geek Ventures. And what my role specifically is focused on, which is my dream job, and I'm so excited to be able to say that because I really worked for this role. I'm specifically focused on sourcing and evaluating prospective investment opportunities, as well as meeting with founders. And I do sit on the investment team. So I'm actually in the meetings, pitching companies and recommending investments, while our decision makers, meaning our managing partner, is making the decision of who to write checks for based on the recommendations of the rest of the investment team. And I'll kind of go a little bit more in depth, especially for founders who are listening. But when I say sourcing and evaluating companies, what that means is that I'm kind of like the first look at companies. So I'm actually going through our inbound deal flow. Companies can submit their information through our website. Companies are reaching out to me on LinkedIn. They're reaching out to me, like maybe we meet at a networking event and they reach out to me kind of as a follow-up, or they send me an email. So I'm kind of going through those. I'm actually doing research on the companies, preparing memos. I'm also taking introductory calls with the founders. And then if I see potential for us to maybe invest later on, by later on, I mean like, after they go through the different stages of our firm, then, I make that recommendation for them to move forward in the process. So I'm kind of doing a lot on the investment side, but what's also really cool about my role is that I actually get to do a little bit of portfolio support. And what that means is that it's basically providing support to our portfolio companies. So for example, one thing, and I'm still very new in my role. I'm actually only about a month in, which is super exciting. But one thing I've started doing is, getting to know our portfolio companies, finding out ways that we can help, maybe promoting their content on LinkedIn, making introductions to investors. And so that's something that I think is very unique, because oftentimes roles are going to be, they're going to be an investment role or a platform role, platform meaning like portfolio support. And so I'm getting to do a little bit of both. And then internally, I also have the opportunity to help with our LinkedIn page since I create a lot of LinkedIn content. And so the firm saw that I was very good at doing that. And so they asked if I'd like to help. So it was really great where they were really looking at my skill sets and finding ways that I could provide value. And now, specifically like what we actually invest in. So for founders listening, if you are interested in reaching out, so Geek Ventures, kind of the pitch, we're an early stage firm investing in immigrant founders. We define immigrant founders as founders who have moved to the US from another country. They're first generation. It can be any other country, we don't specify. We do reserve a small amount of our capital towards non-immigrant founders based in the US. We define that as like underappreciated founders. And we do 200 to 700K check sizes. We're sector agnostic within tech, as long as you're not like biotechnology, like pharmaceuticals, drug development, medical devices. We're pretty flexible. We're very active investors. We typically make 1 to 2 investments each month. And we are actively investing right now and looking at investment opportunities. As immediately after this call, I'm actually going to be going through my inbox as well as our inbound deals and looking at investment opportunities. So we are in the process of wanting to invest in some more great companies.
That is so cool. Okay, you said two things about that really stood out to me that I wanted to just call out for people listening. One is, it sounds like you landed at a company that really values you and is looking at to really, kind of engage the whole you, which I find awesome. That's like really cool to hear that. And then the second part is investing in immigrant founders. I mean, this is, I think, really kind of a standout, kind of way to focus your investments and really driving sort of growth in a niche of a founder niche, but also saying, hey, we recognize you, right? And that's kind of cool too. So, I guess, can you just dive in a little bit on for immigrant founder? So I'm a kid of an immigrant. If I was a founder, would I be considered an immigrant founder, or would it be first generation? Just kind of clarification.
Yeah, absolutely. So unfortunately, it would have to be first generation because the reason we specify that, and that's a great question for founders who are curious. So our founder and managing partner of Geek Ventures is an immigrant himself. So he moved to the United States from Belarus. He is from, he's now living in New York. And the mission behind the firm was that he wanted to support first generation immigrant founders who were wanting to maybe they want to relocate their business to the US because they want to focus on a new market, or they want to leave behind something that was challenging. And so really kind of pave a new path for themselves. And so that's kind of the reasoning behind it. And also because there aren't a lot of firms that that specifically focus on immigrant founders. I mean, there are some, but I think, like you said, it's a niche, but in a way where there's a huge need for it. So that's kind of the reasoning behind that. Thank you for asking.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, no, I just thought that was so unique. All right. So you said this earlier that you knew your path. And what I found really interesting about you, like when I met you, and you gave me some awesome resources, one of which I'm now a part of, Venture Cooperative. I found really fascinating is, and I'm going to go back to my last webinar for people that actually do listen, and in detail. Many people will say you can't really go to school to be a VC, right? There isn't like a degree program that says now you're going to be spit out and you're going to get picked up by a firm. But I see that you kind of had this vision. You knew you wanted to do this. When did you first have that vision? And then kind of my next question, just to tee it up in case you kind of combine the answers, is what did you intentionally do? What are the steps that you did to build up to this career? Because I find it, one, very inspirational. Two, I think as other people are trying to break into venture, they can also maybe see a path that they could try to take pieces of and follow as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that question. And I love to be able to kind of share the unfiltered version of how I got here, because I think it's very important to explain how difficult it was, but also how, if you really want it, how possible it is. So I think from a very young age, I knew that I wanted to do something in business. So I grew up watching Shark Tank. I've seen every episode except 2. And I say that because I've been so busy. I actually haven't watched the most recent one. So I have to have that little clarification there. But, I watched the show from a very young age, and it's really funny, but I even had dreams about like I actually had a dream where I was sitting in one of those chairs on Shark Tank because I was like, this is so fun. And it was the best thing ever. But I think for me, it was the idea of being able to support other people pursue their dreams. Because for me, I always felt that I was always able to, my parents were very supportive of my education. I was always very hard on myself, harder than other people were around me, of just really trying to do something different. And so I think it was that that's kind of why I was interested in from venture capital. But kind of to explain how I got there. So when I was in high school, I'm pretty sure I was like, and I look back and I was like a freshman or a sophomore. I really started going to networking events. I had really unique opportunities. And this was a public high school, but I joined various clubs at my school where it gave me access to go to these events. And so I really made an effort to kind of like at that point, I wasn't like 100% venture capital, but I was like, I knew I had an interest. I knew I like business. So I thought, how can I set up my future self for success? Like, what can I do now where it's going to pay it forward in the future? So I really focused on getting good grades. I focused on doing all these clubs. I focused on leadership roles, right, at a very young age, because I was like, I know someday this is going to be useful. I just don't know how useful it's going to be yet. So I really focused on that. Then when I started applying to colleges, I was really able to kind of hone in on that experience. And so then when I got to be a freshman in college, I was able to actually get leadership roles because of the leadership roles I had in high school. So it's kind of like, how can you build on what you've done before? And so then I kind of kept building on things I did in the past. So I got my first leadership role in college when I was just a freshman. Ended up being like, I think I was like a co-president, or I don't remember the title, or vice president, something like that, like a high leadership role in my school's entrepreneurship club. Ended up getting to go to LA for a Blackstone Launchpad Startup Weekend as a freshman, which kind of started getting the
Whoa.
wheels turning. Yeah, like very unique, all expenses paid, representing my school's one of four students. And so I kind of think like that's some early experiences. And then I use that to say, okay, this is why I like entrepreneurship. And then I kept kind of using the things I did before. So basically thinking of as steps to build. And then I did like, some venture capital roles at university. And I actually just kept saying, who do I know in my network I've built a relationship with that can help me get there? And I made sure to provide value first. So I think like the way, and I could go into more detail, but I don't want to, go too much on a tangent, but I think it's like, you really just think, what did you do previously? And how can you like keep kind of starting very, very small. So you look back, it just started with going to events when I was very young. And then it slowly goes into more experiences that are tangible. So that's what I would say is advice for someone who wants to break into the industry of like, start going to events, start building relationships, maybe do a small side project for someone. And then over time, you can leverage that experience and then you can land that dream role. And if you look back, this is a journey that's years in the making, but it's because of the small things I did when I was young.
Yeah, I call that like I did a talk with a founder and I said it's called like building from experience, right? Like every
Yes.
little experience is like a building block and you kept building and you're going to continue to build, right? You're not done. So, I mean, this is really cool. Okay, so you did some intentional, I mean, obviously some of these experiences are really unique and I think this is great even for like a younger audience that like
Yes.
when you're in high school, may not know what you want to do, but taking on opportunities that challenge you and taking on opportunities that push you in a different way can really help you like kind of find a path in the future. I really love that. And I actually kind of similarly, I feel the same. I was in speech and debate in high school. I think it has set in me a love for public speaking because of that, from forever. But let me ask you a little bit about some of the programs that you sought out, like venture fellowships, specifically that you knew would help you get the job that you wanted, right? The job, because you can't really like go on LinkedIn and be like, let me find some venture capital jobs that
100%
I'm going to
agree.
also be qualified for, right? Like I've seen a couple, they're like 10 years of venture experience, it's like, okay. So yeah, how'd you find out about this? Like, tell us your process, a little bit of that discovery, and then just kind of how those fellowships were.
Yeah, for sure. So, I guess just to kind of circle back on the first experience I'd mentioned in college. So the way that I actually, and this will answer your question, it's a little backstory. So the way that I got that role was because I had first built a relationship with someone at my university, and I worked very hard, and they saw that. So the first thing I would say is that you want to really, really work hard and be extra. And I love saying that, but with those people in your network who have other connections, and you don't do it because you expect something, you do it because you love what you're doing. So that's the first thing to getting these opportunities. Because a lot of those, like my first several opportunities that I got, I didn't apply for, like back when I was a student. I got them because I knew someone. And so maybe I like unofficially applied, but it wasn't like a formal application process. So that's the first thing you need to do. So once you kind of get to that where you've built a relationship, you're past the stage of, okay, I've done all these things through my network. Now I actually have to go and apply to, and I can't get a referral. So how I found some of the programs I'll talk about. So there was Venture Institute by VC Lab. It was an excellent program. I didn't know anybody there. That was just, I applied. I actually found it on LinkedIn. One way that what I recommend to individuals who are kind of at that stage of, okay, I've already maybe gotten some VC experience, or I'm still in the beginning stages, kind of go on LinkedIn, go on Slack groups, follow VC firms that you're really interested in working for, and look for opportunities that they post. And so VC Lab, they had this Venture Institute program, and I basically just applied, and I really focused on my previous experience that I had. And so that doesn't necessarily have to be a full-time VC role. It can just be, okay, I did this experience in college, or I maybe sourced some startups for a VC firm. Like there's a lot of really good sourcing programs out there for people who are just getting started. I believe it's like Level Up Ventures has a really good one. That's the only one I can think of off the top of my head, but like programs like that, you can actually find on LinkedIn or on the firm's website. So that's what I would say is a great way to get started. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And I mean, I honestly am following your footsteps a little bit because I joined the venture cooperative, and I will say it is there is a lot to learn. So I'm actually
Yes.
really happy to have this opportunity. It's like going to like a class, taking a class kind of, and I'm still like, oh, I think I need to go back and watch some recordings because you as much as you learn, there's quite a bit to take in. So I can imagine also building up a process or multiple of them also helps you strengthen that knowledge, right? Similar to like kind of some maybe a venture capital experience would have been, but instead it's a venture fellowship experience. I love that. Okay, so let's shift gears and talk a little bit about you. And you obviously work at a company. You've shared with us your investment philosophy. Like, what are you looking at when you're said after this call you're going to go and open up the inbox? What stands out to you? What are some criteria that you might look at to make determinations based on what you're seeing come in?
Yeah, for sure. So we don't every so first let me say by specify this by saying we don't have a specific, like we're very flexible in terms of certain things that we look for in founders. We don't necessarily say like, okay, this is a hard no if you don't have this, but there are some things that we prioritize. So with that said, we don't look for we don't say a certain amount of revenue that a company has to have. So we go, actually, I didn't mention this, but we invest at the idea up to seed stage. We don't go past 1.5 million ARR. And reason being is that companies past that stage typically have a pretty high valuation. So that's kind of one of the main things. Of course, US based, US focus. There's kind of more detailed criteria on our website. But there are a few things that we really like to see. And this is also something I've kind of adopted. I have a very similar mindset. So founder market fit is something that's really important to us. So it doesn't necessarily, like, having domain expertise, if it's a really technical company, is important, because like if you're starting something really technical, for example, in the AI space, and you're doing like research in AI, having that domain expertise is really, really important. But there are some cases where, okay, maybe you're a serial founder and you are wanting to start a company in a space that you're passionate about, don't necessarily have the domain expertise, but you could teach yourself. Like that's okay too. But I think the most important thing when we say founder market fit is that you need to really have a passion for the industry that you're starting a company in and have some reason for being that industry. Because when I'm looking at founders and I'm trying to understand like why you're in this industry, like there's going to be a lot of tough times. It's also similar to having a VC job. Like there's also very stressful parts of the job too, just because of the things that you're dealing with. You're having to reject founders. You're having to go through sometimes you're really excited about a company, but then it makes the final stages, but for whatever reason, it's not an investment fit. So I think like,
Mhm.
you really have to you really have to make sure that there's a fit here. And the founder has a lot of tough things they're going through too, because they're starting a company. So that's something that I think is really, really important. I would also say another thing is just the risk upside perspective in terms of what the valuation they're raising at. So like we don't specify a valuation, but what really is important that it's reasonable. Sometimes founders have an insane valuation, and from the VC perspective, it doesn't make sense because we have to return capital to our limited partners, and there's a certain like return that we're looking for. So I think from the founder perspective, maybe trying to, what actually be helpful as a founder, I'd recommend is actually learn how a venture capital fund works. And this is something, not a lot of founders do. And I think this would be great because you can actually understand why you're valuing your company a certain way and maybe even help justify that. So those would be like two main things. I could, of course, say more, but I think those are some really good ones for founders to consider.
Yeah, definitely. And that's kind of what I mean, like part of the education that I'm trying to impart is like a lot, I talk to a lot of early stage founders all the time, and it's like everybody is doing the same. They're like, I'm fundraising, I'm trying to raise, I'm trying to do this, I'm trying to raise my seed. So I really feel like for me, it's like it's self-education, but it's also like, hey, let's put this out in the world. You said something interesting about founders sometimes have outlandish valuations. And I will say, I also am a big Shark Tank fan. I have not watched nearly all the episodes, but I often notice that. Like you often notice the valuations of people coming in with like maybe no sales and they aren't maybe realistic to what is actually happening and they often get called out. I do feel like are there ways to like test this out? Like, do you know of good ways to like go and test out your valuation with, that you would maybe say to a founder, like, hey, we think this is not accurate. Here's why. But like before they came to you, are there ways for them to like do some of that pre-work?
Oh, that's a great question. This is actually a really tough one. I'm really glad you asked that. So, and I, as a VC, I wish there was like I'm trying to think of something because if there's a way they could actually have a good valuation before coming to us, that would be very helpful to us. I think the challenge with this too is that every VC has a different opinion on like why companies value a certain way. Because unlike if you went to, let's say, so I actually just went to a private equity conference, and there's a very specific way that they value companies, and it's very tangible because they have revenue, right? But for this stage, sometimes let's say a company doesn't have revenue or maybe they have very little revenue. Oftentimes, evaluation might come based on, okay, what's the growth rate of the market? Like, what's the strength of the team? Like all of these factors. And so hypothetically, they could go to their they could go to maybe VCs in their network and say, okay, what are your thoughts on this valuation? Is it realistic? And you could get a general like consensus of maybe is it too high, too low. And so in a sense, yes, you could. And honestly, like if a founder could do that, I think that would be great because you can make sure it's realistic before like actually officially pitching. But also I think founders have to consider that every VC might have their own opinion. Like even in pitch decks, that's a whole other a whole other rabbit hole, right? Of like, what do we want in this pitch deck versus this VC, right? Because I think a lot of VCs we're very opinionated, which I'm proud of, and we have different opinions. So I would say like you can, but it would be very tough. I know that oftentimes, and I want to give a shout out to my managing partner Ehart. He has a really great thing on LinkedIn. He'll actually post sometimes of like what general valuations are that companies should have. So there's also, I would recommend founders like maybe go to VCs on LinkedIn, kind of look at industry research on like what are general, like what is the market saying. So that would be a good way to kind of test it. But I don't know if there's really like
A
a
great
true
way.
way. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting. So like I mentor at an accelerator here in Chicago, and now that I think about it, they have an investor in residence. And it's like you could technically use your
Yes.
network internally or other founders even can be a good network to sometimes pitch, right? Like do pitch practice and see what people's responses are. You may not get, of course, there's always going to be variability. You may not get the perfect answer, but at least it maybe gives you a little like gut check before you hit the shark tank, as they say.
Yes.
Um, all right, so I'm going to just shift gears a little bit because you talked about your work with platform. I love that. This is like my happy place because I'm definitely a on the sort of operational side helping founders. Um, my business is customer success, and I'm always curious. Does customer success play a role? Like you're in the early stage, right? And I definitely can imagine in the later stages it does. Does customer success play a role in the early stage? What are you seeing? Like, sort of, what are the trends? How do you advise your founders?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that like that's definitely something we really think about, and we're actually really honing in on that right now. And I think that's a great way to phrase it is, in a sense, like they're part of our portfolio. How can we best make sure we're helping them? So the way that we look about this, not only for our current portfolio, but also prospective portfolio companies, is we're very, very clear on our value add. So I guess I'll kind of go through a few things that we're really good at. So we really help our immigrant founders become like experts in fundraising in the US. And so we'll connect them to relevant investors. That's actually something I mentioned earlier, is that I actually was able to make a few introductions for some of our existing portfolio companies. The reason why this is so important is a lot of them are, maybe they don't have a network in the US yet. And so we're able to really figure out, okay, like who can we connect you to? And if we don't know the answer, who can we connect you to that will help give you that answer? We also help them with negotiating term sheets when they get to later rounds, and making sure that we're able to advise them on, like, kind of like you said, advising them on something. So in this case, advising them on good valuation kind of goes back to the valuation idea, right? In terms of like what's good. We also are part of a lot of communities. We have a really strong investor and founder network. so that we can also connect them to other founders too who might be going through something similar. We host a lot of events. We actually just hosted one. I actually wasn't there because I'm based in Austin. We actually hosted one in New York, kind of connecting founders and investors. And I want to be very clear, like, these events aren't only open to portfolio companies. Some are like invite only, some might be curated and you have to apply. But we don't say it's like, we do have opportunities, or maybe we have events open to the public as well. So we do like to make these accessible. And then we also have like, we partner with a recruiting agency. That's actually how I got hired for Geek Ventures. So we help them with recruiting talent. And so that's just kind of a few of the ways that we kind of think, with your word, in your words, like customer success, of how can we help our companies? Because if we help them, then they actually are going to end up referring more good companies to join for us to invest in. And so we think of it like a win-win, because they've treated me very well. I've only been here a month, and I cannot say enough good things about the company. And so it makes me see, if they're like this towards me, like they're doing the exact same thing for their portfolio companies. They're being so helpful. They're really trying to figure out, like, how can we help? We also do check-in calls with the portfolio companies as well. I forgot to mention that, where we actually figure out what their specific needs are. So we really do whatever we can to help them. And I think that's why I'm so proud to be a part of the firm, because one of my reasons for being in VC2 is to help founders and really find ways that I can support. And so that kind of goes back to, how can I be a value add, and bring my unique skills and resource to the firm.
Yeah, it's like we're going to create a new field, portfolio success, because I feel like that's kind of a new, unique way of thinking of customer success. Like, they're not your customer. They're not paying you. In fact, it's the opposite. So they're getting, this infusion, but you're rooted in their success. Like, your success
Yes.
is based on their success. So it's the same value proposition as customer success in a corporation, right? Where the customer, if they're not achieving value, you're not going to have long-term returns from them. So, kind of a similar value prop. I love that example. Okay, so let's do, like, kind of a like wrap up. Any advice for someone that, like, is doing what you're doing, or wants to do what you're doing, or wants to learn more? And then can you share, like, I like to do a two-part always, I know, make it complicated. Advice for people that maybe want to be like Sarah someday, or advice for people that are in the market today that are like, it feels tough. Like, what do you kind of say to people today? And even when you have to sometimes reject them, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and let me clarify before I answer this, because it's a great question. When you say like having to reject them, are you saying more of like from rejecting, having to reject founders, and or having to reject people for VC roles? Because I can touch on both, and I think both are important.
Oh, well, both. And I guess I liked that you talked about sometimes you have the hard work, right? But I'm sure that when you reject someone, you're also like, hey, I'm still trying to give you hope because you can find it somewhere else, right? So
Yes.
I'd love to, like, know that. And similarly with VC. So yeah, let's dive into that. Both
Yeah,
of
for
those.
sure. So I'll do the first question, I'll do advice, and then I'll answer the second one about rejection, because I think that's a very important thing to touch on. I have a lot of thoughts. So, in terms of advice, so I think one thing that I've learned from my journey is that it's a long game. And I think, this is something I've always had in my mind, even from a very young age. Like, I think it even goes back to elementary school. And to be honest, I don't know. I think I was born this way. Like, people say, why were you so like studious? Did your parents like force this on you? Because that has been a question. I said, no, I actually cried when I got a B because I was upset, or an A minus. Like, I was literally frustrated with myself, just growing up. And so that's like, I've always been this way. But you really think about like what, like how long is it? Not about like how long it's going to take, but like, what are you doing every day? It's those building blocks, going back to the beginning. Understanding that like you're not going to see results immediately. Sometimes it's going to be like the growth. It might be slow growth, and then all of a sudden things just like like I had this point in my career where everything just like was working, right? But to be able to get to that point where I saw the success, people might call it overnight success. You kind of have to build up towards that. You have to build your network, and so I would say just being really patient and figuring out like what are the small things you're doing every day to actually get to that point. Because it's not going to happen immediately. Let's say you want to get that VC role. It's not, I mean, some people, yes, are lucky and you might get that dream role very quickly, but that's not the case for everybody. And for me, my journey was a lot longer for me to get to the role that I wanted. So I think it's like also understanding when you have those, and kind of going to rejection now, when you have those rejections and not letting them break you. And I think it's really tough because, and I'll speak to this first from the beginning of VC job, and then I'll speak to the founder side. But from the VC side, I think there's a point where I went through some really tough times, in all honesty. And I like to be very honest about this because I want people to see that, like, yes, I'm doing very well now, but it wasn't always that way. And there are times where I questioned everything. I was like, is this the right choice? I made so many sacrifices to try to get into VC, how competitive is, how brutal is, things that people say to you. For me, because I'm Gen Z, being young, also being female, hurtful things people will say to you of like, if you should actually be in the industry, like you keep getting rejected all this time. Sometimes people ghost you after interviews. And so I think it's just understanding that, like, trying not to take things personally. And I think, this is also the case from the founder, because sometimes as a VC, we're rejecting a founder, but it has nothing to do with the founder. Like, it's oftentimes, so this is something, this is not my thoughts. It's actually my managing partner's thoughts. And I like want to give him credit, because this is a really great point. I want founders to understand this, but sometimes we'll reject a company and it's not even that it's a bad idea or there's not enough sales. It's a matter of, we're seeing a lot of companies and all of them are really, really good. It's just a matter of like, which one is the best. And that's a really tough thing to have to reject founders, because sometimes they're really, like you said, they're a great company and they say, why did you reject us? And I say, it really is just a matter of what's in our pipeline right now. It's just a matter of like, what's one tiny thing that's better. It's nothing that you could do differently. It's just a matter of when the company came to us at that time. And so I think this is important for founders to understand, because don't take the rejection as you're a bad business, because oftentimes we're rejecting great companies that have revenue. Like, we wish we could invest in them. And then what we do is I'll actually refer that company to someone else and say, hey, this is a great company. We just had all these good opportunities. We can't invest in all of them. So think about that. It's usually not you. Don't take it personally. And then as a VC, if you're applying for jobs, think about the same perspective. They get hundreds of candidates for these roles. I think a lot of times you'll see like 500 to 1,000 applicants for one role. So just keep that in mind and don't take it personally. Maybe you're not a fit for one firm, but that doesn't mean you're not a fit. It doesn't mean that you can't find a different role. So that's some things I would keep in mind. And I wish someone told me that back then, because I had a lot of nights of like tears and just late nights and just being really upset and questioning everything. And so like it was rough for a really long time.
Thank you for sharing that candidly, because in the market, like I feel like the job market, at least in like tech that I'm seeing is, there's not as many jobs as there are people looking for them. And I think that sentiment can resonate to many people that are challenged, struggling, maybe laid off for a couple of months, right? And I will say, I think it's nice to hear people talk about that, right? Because yes, we started off with you achieve your dream job, but it's not something that happened overnight. It was a long game. And in that game, there are going to be ups and downs, right? And so it's really how much you can persevere that's going to help you to
Yes.
get to that next stage, right? So, and understandable, it's not going to always be easy, right? It's not going to be pretty. Um, that's a really great sentiment. You said something interesting too about reject, when you have to reject companies, and it's not that they're bad, it's just that there's too many that are good. And it's like you forget about that side of competition, right? It's like
Yes.
timing is everything. I've been looking through the venture cooperative like deal flow, just reading what people are submitting, and I'm actually reading the comments of what is said, after the fact, and they'll say, oh, we have a similar company, like this, or oh, we already looked at this company, and we looked at this space, this is not even, there's a lot of reasons you might not take a founder, and it's not necessarily, that you're not doing a good job. So it's like, it could be just not a good fit. Well, I will say this was so enlightening, and thank you so much for all the candid answers. I think just really made this feel super rich and interesting for our listeners. Thank you so much. And I'm like so happy for you that you landed your dream gig and hopefully continue to add a ton of value in the space for founders, which I know you will do. But thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I could add one closing comment
Sure,
too.
of course. Yes.
Yeah, so I did want to mention one other thing too, to both the founders and VCs, is to not let, like, if you have a non-traditional background, to not let that stop you from pursuing what you want to pursue. I think that's very important, because I don't have a traditional background for VC. Like, I'm female, no Ivy League degree, no investment banking, not don't have a finance degree. Like, I didn't go into consulting first either. Like, I just went straight into VC. And I do want to be clear that I have worked for startups. I have also worked in corporate, like in real estate. So like, I have done other things, not just VC. So I do have a way to provide that value. But my point is, it's not like the traditional way. Similarly to a founder, if you don't have a standard founder background, you're not like YC backed, all that, don't let that stop you. And I think just understand that if you can tell your story well, both if you want to get into VC or you want to start a company, that's what's going to help you stand out.
I love that. That's a great, great closing thought. Well, thank you so much, Sarah. It's been
Of
awesome
course,
to
thank
have
you.
you. And I look forward to staying in touch with you.
I look forward to it as well.